I finally had the chance to see Avatar Fire and Ashes in 3D on the big screen. And honestly, it didn't feel like I watched a movie. It felt more like I briefly visited Pandora. While watching the film, something very personal came back to me. Did you know that James Cameron is now a citizen of Wellington, New Zealand? Back in 2019, I spent 13 months in New Zealand myself, studying English. I visited Wellington too. The first time I saw the ocean there, I remember thinking, wow, this really feels like another world. An endless sea, powerful winds, a city where nature felt overwhelmingly larger than people. And maybe that's why every time I see Pandora's oceans and forests, I don't see them as pure imagination. I feel like this world might have been born from a real place. A place someone truly saw, felt and loved. That was also where I learned English, where I lived inside a different culture, and where for the first time I learned how to see the world differently. Working at a seaside banquet hall, delivering Domino's pizza, attending security and AI conferences, and meeting people I never forget. Those memories are still very much alive inside me. So for me, Pandora's sea and forest aren't just CGI landscapes. They feel like a world I once lived in. Maybe that's why Avatar has always felt so personal to me. Because the film's central theme, connection, is deeply tied to my own memories. And when I think about that, even the title of this movie starts to feel different. The word avatar comes from the Sanskrit word avatara. Its meaning is simple, a god descending into another body. In other words, an incarnation. But the single word defines the philosophy of the entire Avatar series. If my body changes, am I still me? Is identity something we are born with, or something we choose? And the most important question of all, can you truly understand another being? Avatar may look like a sci-fi blockbuster on the surface, but beneath it lies a deep philosophy of connection, a monistic worldview, deep ecology, moral pluralism, and at its heart, a powerful family drama. And 3D doesn't just explain these ideas, it makes us experience them. Fire gives us power, as she remembers every choice we've made. This isn't a story about good versus evil, it's a story about what remains after we choose. Pandora was never a curse, it was the price of freedom. And violence doesn't come only from evil hearts, it is born from broken histories and the conditions that shape them. So now across 12 chapters, we'll explore the philosophical questions Avatar Fire and Ashes asks, and the English expression hidden inside them, deeply but clearly together. Alright, let's properly step into chapter 1. In this chapter, we'll first organize what Avatar Fire and Ashes is about, and what kind of world this film is trying to show us. Before we get into philosophy, there is a simple question we need to ask. What kind of story does James Cameron want to tell this time? At this point, the Avatar series is no longer just one movie. It's a massive immersive experience. The series is often credited with reshaping modern cinema by fully blending visual innovation, environmental messages, and deep philosophical questions into a single world. This isn't just a 3D movie, it's closer to a form of total art, where world building, technology, emotion, and spirituality collide and somehow stay in balance. Fire and Ashes begin exactly as its title suggests, in a world left behind after the fire. If the first two films were about resisting invasion and fighting to protect family, Fire and Ashes asks what comes after death. Is the world we believe we protected really the same as it was before? Fire gives power, but it also leaves behind irreversible change. This film shows us Pandora after victory, Pandora after resistance. One of the most striking elements in this film is the introduction of the Ashy people. They aren't simply new villains, they are survivors. People who managed to live on after losing everything, burned land, collapsed communities, and from that destruction, a completely different way of life and a different moral system emerges. Through them, the film asks uncomfortable questions. Is living in harmony with nature the only correct way to live? After losing everything, should the same moral rules still apply? For the first time, Avatar seriously examines the worldview of the enemy. The world has grown larger, but the emotional center of the story remains the Sully family. Jake, Natalie, and their children are no longer just a family on the run. They are now people who must make choices that shape the future of this world. In this film, family is both something to protect and the starting point of the conflict and decision. How much are we willing to endure in order to protect this world? Pandora in the first film was breathtaking. In the second film, it expanded, but the Pandora of Fire and Ashes is different. It is still beautiful, but it's already wounded. A world standing at the edge between recovery and permanent change. Because of that, the emotional tone of this film leans less toward wonder and more toward weight. Less hope, more responsibility. Yes, the visual experience is still overwhelming. 3D, motion capture, world building, the technology has evolved once again. But this time, the message behind the technology is clear. This isn't a world meant to be watched. It's a world you have to step into and carry. The audience is no longer just a spectator. We become witnesses to this world. To sum it up, Avatar Fire and Ashes is a film that says this: fire is choice, Pandora is the world those choices create, and ashes is time that remembers the consequences. This film asks, did we make the right choice? And even more uncomfortably, now that the choice is made, how are we going to live with the result? With that, we now have the big picture of this world. From the next chapter on, we'll start unpacking the philosophies and concepts hidden inside this story one by one. In this chapter, we are going to look closely at one big question. Why was a film like Avatar only possible? Because it was James Cameron who made it. James Cameron isn't just a movie director. He's much closer to a scientist, an inventor, and an engineer. In The Terminator, he explores artificial intelligence. In Aliens, human solidarity and technology. In Titanic, human emotion in the middle of disaster. And in Avatar, nature, life, and the interconnectedness of existence. Across all of these films, there is one question that runs through them all. What is the relationship between technology and humanity? Cameron's defining trait is simple. He never compromises. Reshooting a single scene dozens of times is normal for him. And if the technology he needs doesn't exist, he builds it himself. New camera systems, advanced motion capture technology, even deep-sea submersibles for ocean exploration. That's why people in the film industry often say James Cameron isn't just a director, he's an engineer. What many people don't realize is that the first Avatar script was already finished back in 1994. But Cameron said this: "With today's technology, I can't make the avatar I imagine." So he waited not for a year, but for more than a decade. When motion capture technology finally advanced, Cameron didn't just use it. He jumped in and pushed it even further. And in 2009, the world was finally ready to meet Avatar. The Pandora Cameron created isn't just a CG background, it's closer to a real planet. Biology, linguistics, the Navi language, ecology, religion, social systems, even neural networks in plants. Everything was designed in detail using 3D models and concept art. That's why Pandora isn't just a setting. It feels like a living ecological system. Cameron has always been deeply concerned with the relationship between humans and nature, and Avatar is where that philosophy becomes most visible. Pandora is a world where every being is connected like a single network. This is a modern reinterpretation of ecological philosophy, monism, and even pantheism. It breaks down the boundary between technology and life and brings us back to one fundamental question: are humans separate from nature or part of it? Avatar isn't just a sci-fi blockbuster. It's a massive project where technology, art, philosophy, and engineering all merge into one. And the one person who understands all four and can even create them himself is James Cameron. That's why Avatar isn't a film just anyone could make. It's a film that was only possible because it was James Cameron who made it. Now, let's dig into the real meaning behind the title Avatar. Because the word avatar doesn't simply mean a virtual character, its roots go much deeper, all the way back to ancient Indian mythology and an even older language, Sanskrit. In Sanskrit, avatara is made up of two parts, ava meaning down and ta descending into the world, an incarnation, or a divine manifestation. In Indian mythology, the god Vishnu descends into the world in many different forms to restore balance to the universe. Sometimes as a human like Rama or Krishna, sometimes as an animal like a fish, a turtle or boar. So when we say avatar, what we really mean is this: a divine consciousness entering another body. So why did James Cameron choose the title Avatar? Cameron has explained it clearly himself. He wanted to express a spiritual transformation, a consciousness entering a different body. That's why the word avatar fits perfectly. In the film, Jake leaves behind his human body and uses a Navi body as his avatar, almost like a living incarnation. He descends into a new world, Pandora, and goes through a journey of growth, transformation, and ultimately redemption. When you see it laid out like this, Cameron's choice of title makes a perfect sense. But Cameron didn't stop with Avatar. He chose another powerful mythological name, Pandora. Coincidence? Not at all. It's a very deliberate choice. In Greek mythology, Pandora appears after Prometheus gives fire to humanity. Prometheus gives humans fire. Zeus responds by giving humans Pandora. The structure is simple but profound. Fire is power. Fire is action. Fire is choice. Pandora is the price of that power. If fire is a choice, Pandora is the consequence. Let's pause for a moment and look at fire scientifically. Fire doesn't exist on its own. It requires conditions: fuel, oxygen, and ignition source. And when you add one more element, a chain reaction, fire sustains itself. Logically speaking, this means fire represents power, but the power only becomes real when conditions are in place. When people talk about Pandora's box, they usually say he opened it out of curiosity. But philosophically, the more important question isn't why he opened it, it's what was inside. Inside the box were disease, suffering, conflict, death, labor, and the finiteness of time. In other words, the conditions of being alive. Before the box was opened, humanity was ignorant, simple, and protected. After it was opened, humans became aware, wounded, and complex, and most importantly, there was no going back. One final thing remained inside the box: hope, elpis. But even in ancient Greece, its meaning was debated. Hope is a blessing, the final gift that allows humans to survive suffering. Hope is another curse, something that traps us in endless endurance of pain. From Albert Camus-style perspective, hope can bind humans to the future and prevent them from fully facing the absurdity of the present. So the question becomes, is hope salvation, or is it just more fuel for endless struggle? Fire and Ash doesn't answer that question. Instead, it asks something else. Even so, will you choose to keep living? Let's bring all of this together in one structure. Fire is choice. Fire is rebellion. Fire gives us power. Pandora is the beginning of consequences, a world that opens once the choice is made. And Ashi is memory. Ashi is scar. Ashi is history and responsibility that we must carry to the very end. So we can say this: fire is the choice, Pandora is the beginning, Ashi is what remains. And doesn't this structure perfectly mirror the path of modern civilization? Nuclear power fire left Hiroshima as ash. The internet fire left behind manipulation and hatred as ash. And now, the fire of AI may leave behind ash we still can't fully see or control. Pandora is not a punishment, it is reality. Pandora isn't a curse meant to destroy humanity. It may be the condition that makes us truly human. Before fire, humans were powerless but innocent. After Pandora, humans suffer but they can choose. Suffering is the side effect of freedom. If we sum it all up in one sentence, if Prometheus' fire is power, Pandora is the world that power opens, and Avatar Fire and Ash is a story about how we choose to live among the ashes of that world. Now that we've explored the origins of the word Avatar and the mythological meaning behind the name Pandora, it's time to see how those ideas expand into environmental philosophy inside the film. This is in many ways one of Avatar's most essential themes. On the surface, Avatar looks like a science fiction blockbuster, but at its core, it's built on a philosophy called deep ecology. The idea is surprisingly simple. All living beings have value, not because they are useful to humans, but because they exist. Life deserves respect simply for being alive. That's the ethical foundation Avatar stands on. The way the Na'vi connect with nature goes far beyond being a tribe. that loves the environment. They are connected to the planet itself, to Ava, as part of a single living network. This closely mirrors the ideas proposed by scientist James Lovelock. His view was the Earth is not just a planet, but a self-regulating system that behaves almost like a living organism. Pandora works the same way. Every plant, animal, and being is linked to sharing information, balance, and memory. Standing in direct opposition to this worldview is anthropocentrism, the belief that humans are superior to nature. In the film, humans destroy Pandora's forest and extract resources by force, clearly acting on the idea that nature exists to be used. The Navi, on the other hand, never see nature as a resource. They see it as a relationship, as connection, as part of their own existence. That contrast is what creates the film's central conflict. Philosophically, this idea has real-world roots. The founder of deep ecology, Alienation, and the environmental thinker, Aldo Leopold, both argued that humans and nature are not separate. They described the natural world as a shared community, where humans are members, not masters. In that sense, the Navi way of life can be seen as a fully realized model of ecological ethics. Avatar is not simply a movie that uses nature as a backdrop. It's a philosophical critique of human-centered thinking and a powerful statement about the interconnected value of all life. So far, we've looked at why Avatar: Fire and Ashes is often described as a landmark film of deep ecology. But there is one moment where that philosophy becomes unmistakably clear, when nature and technology collide. In this chapter, we'll take a closer look at that core theme, nature versus technology. Pandora isn't just a background setting. The entire planet functions as a massive living network. Trees, animals, plants, the Navi, even the ground itself, everything is connected. In English, we'd call this an interconnected ecosystem, a system where no part exists in isolation. Now let's look at how human technology works in contrast. At its core, human technology assumes separation, control, and dominance. If there is a forest, it gets cleared. If there is a resource, it gets extracted. A planet isn't seen as a living system, but as a warehouse of materials. This way of thinking is often called an extraction-based mindset. That's why the film's most powerful scenes happen right at the point of collision between these two worlds. Bulldozers tearing through living forests, military drones chasing Pandora's creatures from the sky, human machines attempting to destroy the Tree of Souls. These aren't just action scenes. They are philosophical images, visual representations of a clash between values. Here's where things get interesting. The Navi are deeply natural beings, but that doesn't mean they reject technology entirely. The difference lies in how they use it. Their tools are built on harmony with the ecosystem. Neural interfaces with Ikran, direct connections with Ava, using energy flows that already exist in nature. In English, we might call this bio-integrated technology. Technology designed to work with life, not against it. The two types of technology may look similar on the surface, but philosophically, they are opposite. This contrast sits at the very heart of the Avatar worldview. Standing between these two worlds is Jake Sully. Avatar technology is created by humans, but through it, Jake learns how to truly connect with nature. In the process, he begins to question the direction human technology has taken. Jake becomes a bridge, a living link between nature and technology. In Avatar, nature and technology aren't just two forces fighting each other. The film contrasts technology built for domination with technology built for connection and asks us a deeper question. What kind of technology are we choosing to create? After looking at the clash between nature and technology, there is one more critical question we need to ask. What actually drives these destructive technologies? The answer is simple and uncomfortable. Corporate greed. When you look closely at Avatar's conflict, it's not just a story about humans versus the Na'vi. Behind every major decision sits a powerful force that shapes the entire conflict. Greed at the corporate level. And the film shows with brutal clarity how that greed can collapse nature, ecosystems, and even individual lives. The human organization pulling the strings in the film is the Resources Development Administration, or RDA. The goal is simple: extract the rare mineral called unobtainium from Pandora, no matter the cost. Nature, civilization, the lives of indigenous people, to them these are just obstacles. In English, this mindset is often described as resource extraction and decisions driven purely by profit or profit-driven decisions. Technology itself isn't evil. The real problem is the intention behind it. Bulldozers tearing down forests, gunships flying overhead, missiles aimed at the Tree of Souls, all of these are examples of destructive technology. But what truly powers them is the pursuit of profit. And here, the film delivers one of its most important messages. The ethics of technology are not defined by the machine itself, but by who uses it and why. Corporate greed in Avatar is essentially a modern reworking of old colonialism, a system where one civilization labels another as inferior, ignores its culture, and destroys its environment for the sake of resources. In English, we call this neo-colonialism, colonial logic updated for a corporate age. One of the most interesting aspects of the film is that corporate greed doesn't just destroy others, it destroys itself. By tearing down nature, crushing culture, and attempting to control everything through technology, the system loses sight of the one thing that truly matters: connection. And without understanding connection, the entire structure collapses under its own weight. Avatar shows on an epic scale how corporate greed can corrupt nature, culture, life, and even technology itself. In the end, the real problem isn't technology, it's human choices that fail to control desire. We've just seen how corporate greed tears Pandora apart, but behind that greed lies something even older and far more dangerous. A recurring pattern in human history: colonialism. Humanity's arrival on Pandora, pushing out the Na'vi and seizing their resources, isn't a new story. It's a pattern repeated again and again throughout Earth's history. The displacement of indigenous peoples, the monopolization of resources, violence justified in the name of civilization, and the alliance of the military, corporations, and science, all of these turns Avatar into a clear allegory of colonialism. You'll often hear terms like colonial exploitation, resource conquest, forced displacement, and every one of them applies here. The core conflict in Avatar isn't just bad corporations versus good natives. The human system on Pandora operates as a crazy colonial power structure, a fusion of the military, corporate capital, and scientific authority. And this isn't just fiction. In the real world, technologically superior powers have repeatedly used the excuse of civilizing mission to dominate other cultures. Avatar mirrors that pattern almost perfectly. This is why Avatar can be read not just as a sci-fi blockbuster, but through the lens of post-colonial theory. The actions of the Resource Development Administration mining unobtainium at any cost symbolize Western imperialism and economic colonialism. It echoes centuries of real history, where indigenous lands were exploited in the name of progress and profit. Jake Sully's personal journey is deeply symbolic. At first, he arrives on Pandora as part of the colonial system, a soldier tasked with observing, controlling, and reporting on the Na'vi. But as he experiences Pandora, something changes. He begins to lose his old identity and slowly forms a new one. This mirrors what philosopher French Fanon described as the decolonization of the self, the process of reclaiming identity from colonial power. In simple terms, decolonization of the self, recovering one's identity. Jake's transformation is not just physical, it's psychological and ethical. In the end, Avatar asks a deeply uncomfortable question. Are humans truly more civilized simply because they possess advanced technology? Or are the Na'vi who live in balance with nature and show deep spiritual maturity the ones who represent a more complete form of civilization? This directly challenges the long-standing colonial idea of a civilizing mission. Avatar uses the world of Pandora to retell, in modern form, the history of colonialism, exploitation, domination, and the loss and recovery of identity. From here, one philosophical question follows almost naturally, and that question is cultural relativism. Put simply, cultural relativism is the idea that every culture should be understood on its own terms. In other words, we don't judge another culture's beliefs or behaviors by our own external standards. Instead, we try to understand them within their cultural context, or more casually in English, don't judge from the outside. Avatar expresses this idea very powerfully. At first, humans see the Na'vi as primitive, backward society, but that view itself is a classic example of Western-centered thinking. Jake, however, takes a different path. As he enters Na'vi society, learning their language, customs, relationship with nature, and spiritual worldview, he slowly reaches a crucial realization. A culture may seem strange from the outside, but once you step inside, it often turns out to be deeply logical. From the outside, Na'vi's custom can look unscientific or even irrational, but within their own system, every action is connected to sustainability, the long-term balance of the ecosystem. In that sense, their culture may actually be more rational and more mature than human civilization. Cultural relativism isn't about deciding which culture is right or wrong. It's about attitude. An attitude of openness, a willingness to understand, and an attitude of humility, recognizing that every culture is shaped by its own history and environment. Jake's story isn't just an adventure. It's a lived experience of cultural relativism. He lets go of human standards and begins to see the world through Navi's value. And in that process, his identity, ethics, and worldview are completely rearranged. In English, we might describe this as seeing through new eyes, rebuilding one's identity. Avatar emphasizes the humility, respect, and openness required to truly understand other cultures. In that sense, it's one of the clearest visual examples of cultural relativism in modern cinema. Now let's move toward a more future-focused question. How is technology changing who we are, and does it connect us more deeply, or does it push us further apart? Avatar doesn't present technology itself as evil, but it is deeply critical of how technology is used. In the film, humans use machines to control nature, reducing life to data, efficiency, and profit. This lines up almost perfectly with the philosopher Martin Heidegger's idea of inframing, Gestalt, a technological worldview that sees all beings as nothing more than resources. Forests become raw materials, animals become data points, even entire civilizations become objects to be mined and managed. But here's the interesting reversal. The most important technology in the film, the Avatar Link, does the opposite. Instead of separating humans from life, it connects human to nature and to the other. This is where the film can be read through the lens of transhumanism. Transhumanism is a philosophy that explores how technology can help humans transcend biological limits. From that perspective, Jake living through an avatar body is a form of technological evolution. His body is no longer human, but his consciousness and emotions are. The boundary between human and machine, self and other, starts to dissolve. In English, we might call this a hybrid identity, an identity formed across biological and technological lines. This leads us to the film's central question. Does technology isolate us, or can it lead to deeper empathy? The machines used to attack Pandora produce alienation, distance, domination, and disconnection. But the Avatar Link creates empathy and a sense of community. So the film makes its position clear. The problem isn't technology itself, it's the direction we choose to take it. The chapter highlights Avatar's key philosophical contrast. Technology can become a tool that dominates life and creates alienation, or it can become a bridge that connects humans with nature and with one another. In the end, the ethics of technology don't lie in the machines. They lie in the choices humans make when using them. This time, we are going to move down into an even deeper question. Before anything else, we have to ask, what does it mean to exist at all? This is the deepest philosophical layer that Avatar touches, ontology. To explain ontology through a simple metaphor, it's like a map that shows how the entire world is structured. On this map, there are two major paths. Dualism argues that mind and matter are two fundamentally different substances. The philosopher most closely associated with this view is René Descartes. But dualism immediately runs into a serious problem. How do mind and matter actually interact with each other at all? Monism takes a very different position. It argues that the world ultimately comes from one underlying reality. That reality could be material, or mental, or even neutral. And importantly, that underlying reality does not have to be God. The scene where Jack leaves his human body and operates a Navi body dramatically visualizes this philosophical conflict. English expressions you might hear here are mind-body split and one underlying reality. Am I my body or am I my consciousness? This question immediately brings Descartes' mind-body dualism to mind, but at the same time, it pushes us beyond that dualism toward a monistic perspective. This is where many people get confused. In fact, not only beginners in philosophy, but even philosophers themselves often confuse being and ontology. The reason is simple. Ontology deals with being itself. Let me explain with a metaphor. Being the fact that things are, it's like the ocean we are already sailing in. We don't need to explain it. We don't need to analyze it. It already surrounds us. Ontology, on the other hand, is our attempt to draw a map in order to understand the ocean. And here's the crucial point. A map is a tool that tries to explain the ocean. But the ocean already exists before the map. In other words, ontology is an attempt to explain being, but being already exists as presence even before any explanation begins. At this point, we need to pause and introduce one extremely important concept from the philosopher Martin Heidegger. That concept is called the forgetfulness of being. What does it mean? Think about how we usually live. We are very interested in questions like what is this? How useful is it? How can we use it? But we almost never ask questions like what does it mean that this exists? What does it mean that we are here live right now? Heidegger described this situation like this. We become obsessed with things, while gradually forgetting the fact that they are. That forgetting of being itself is what he called the forgetfulness of being. Heidegger explains that this forgetfulness appears on three different levels. First, on the level of being itself, because being sometimes reveals itself and sometimes hides itself. This forgetfulness shows up in history as something like a recurring destiny. Second, on the level of human understanding, when we try to understand the world only by turning everything into an object and only by seeing things as useful, this way of seeing is convenient, but at the same time, it leads to dangerous and unavoidable consequences. And finally, on the level of real-world relationships, when technology makes us treat all beings like mechanical parts, the meaning of existence becomes distorted. As a result, our sense of humanity disappears, nature becomes devastated, and in extreme case, even tragedies like war can follow. So when Heidegger talks about the forgetfulness of being, he's not just introducing a philosophical term, he is warning us about our entire way of relating to the world. When we bring this idea into Avatar, it becomes extremely clear. Why do humans come to Pandora? Unobtainium, resources, energy efficiency. For them, Pandora is not a living world. It's a mine to be dug, a territory to be conquered, a resource to be exploited. In other words, Even while looking at Pandora, humans aren't seeing that the world exists. They only see how the world can be used. This is exactly what Heidegger meant by the forgetfulness of being. Now compare that with Navi. When they look at the forest, they don't see timber, they see their ancestors. When they look at animals, they don't see resources, they see connected life. For them, Pandora is not something to gain from. It's a world they already exist with. This difference is crucial. It's the difference between seeing existence as an object and experiencing existence as being with. And in Fire and Ashes, this forgetfulness of being becomes even more extreme. Fire gave power, technology gave possibility, but what remained in the end was ashes. Humans succeeded in changing the world, but they never truly saw that the world was a living being. So the film seems to ask us this question. Have we become so focused on using the world that we've forgotten the fact that the world exists at all? To sum it up, the forgetfulness of being is a state in which we can no longer face the world as it is, and instead see everything only in terms of function and usefulness. And the tragedy of Avatar doesn't begin with the destruction of Pandora. It begins earlier with the moment humans stopped seeing Pandora as being in the first place. And so we relate this final question. If we are beings that are originally connected to one another, is human nature fundamentally good or fundamentally selfish? We usually imagine things like this: being, consciousness, thought, knowledge, philosophy, almost like a single tree, stacked upward layer by layer. But philosophy tells us that the structure is not that simple. Being, consciousness, thought, knowledge, and philosophy do not form a tree that grows upward. They are closer to a multi-layered system of mirrors, constantly reflecting one another. Being reveals itself through consciousness. Consciousness operates through thought. Thought is organized into knowledge, and then knowledge in turn becomes philosophy, which circles back and reflects on being itself. So this is not a structure that moves only forward. It's a circular network of understanding, where each layer continuously reflects the others. That's why philosophy is not simply the highest discipline at the top. Philosophy is closer to an attempt to gather the entire process by which being tries to understand itself into a single structural view. And when we see it this way, doesn't it become clearer why Avatar is so persistent in showing existence, consciousness, and connection again and again? From here, it's natural to move into the philosophy of mind. Simply put, this field asks, where am I located within the map of the world? At the same time, it acts as a bridge between ontology and epistemology, because consciousness is something that both exists and knows. There are two major theories in the philosophy of mind. Ego theory argues that the self is like a solid captain steering a ship, a stable, internal or independent central entity that does not fundamentally change. Bundle theory pushes monism even further and makes a radical claim. We don't even need that single core entity. In this view, the self is not a fixed substance at all, but a flow made up of sensations, memories, and experiences. Here is no captain, only the moving waves of the voyage itself. In the film, Jake constantly moves back and forth between the two models. Even while using the avatar body, he keeps asking himself the same question: Am I still me? Here is a crucial point. Ontology and epistemology are not separate fields. They presuppose each other and reveal each other. Ontology asks what exists. Epistemology asks how do we know what exists. It's not enough to treat epistemology as just a subcategory inside ontology. A more accurate way to understand their relationship is to see them as concentric circles, interlocked and inseparable. This is why the philosopher Martin Heidegger made this famous claim: being reveals itself only through understanding. In ancient philosophy, the philosophy of being ontology focused on questions like what exists, what is the essence of reality, what is the fundamental structure of the world. For example, the game itself, the players, and physical reality as such. In modern philosophy, the philosophy of knowing, epistemology shifted the focus to how do you know what exists. What are the grounds and limits of knowledge, perception, and belief? For example, data, statistics, patterns, and the process by which information becomes knowledge. And in contemporary philosophy, there is a growing tendency to study epistemology not as a separate field, but as part of an integrated structure that reconnects knowing and being. Pandora's ecosystem is not just a sci-fi setting. Multiple philosophical traditions are layered on top of one another here. Monism, all beings on Pandora are connected through a single origin, a living network of life. Pantheism, that single principle is divine, and divine power permeates the entirety of nature, Eva. Interdependency, much like the Buddhist perspective, no being exists entirely on its own. Pandora's life network simultaneously calls to mind Baruch Spinoza's monism, modern system theory, and the Buddhist idea of interdependency. Do you remember the moment when Jake says, "Yeah, it's my birthday after all"? Philosophically, this is an enormous declaration. In that moment, he moves beyond Descartes' dualism and arrives at the conclusion of existentialism. English expression, existence precedes essence. In other words, my essence is formed by the life I have lived. Jake's identity is no longer defined by human body, but it is newly shaped through the life he chooses and the community he commits to. Here we arrive at another crucial philosophical crossroad, the question of human nature itself. Are humans originally good or originally inclined toward evil? Mencius argued that humans are born good by nature. Empathy, compassion, and communal bonds are natural tendencies. From this view, connection and harmony like those of Navi are humanity's default state. Junzis argue the opposite. Humans are born selfish and inclined toward wrongdoing. Goodness must be cultivated through education and discipline. This perspective explains the greed-driven resource exploitation of human armies and corporations. Avatar stages these two positions in direct, dramatic conflict. On Pandora, connection of baseline goodness emerges naturally. Among the humans from Earth, desire-organized systemic selfishness takes control. Visually, the film delivers this message. Goodness reveals itself when beings are connected to nature. Evil is amplified within structure of separation and domination. In the monistic worldview, all beings are connected. Goodness exists within relationships, but through separation and instrumentalization, division and domination, evil grows within disconnection. This expands directly into an ontological question. What kind of beings are humans? Connected beings or separated ones? The community Jake ultimately chooses suggests a mentioned conclusion. Goodness is not invented, it is restored. By exploring the nature of existence and ethics this way, Avatar gradually leads our gaze toward an even more fundamental dimension, spiritual monism. Ava is not merely a god, she is a spiritual substance that permeates all things. Pandora's network closely resembles Spinoza's philosophy, in which all beings are expressions of a single substance, God or nature. And this life network also aligns with the Buddhist idea of interdependence. No being exists in isolation. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel described this process in this way. History is the process by which spirit comes to know itself. In other words, the entire world evolves as a single conscious flow, and existence is not made of separate fragments, but of interconnected moments within a process of self-recognition. In the end, Avatar is a film that begins with dualistic mechanism and gradually develops toward monism. As the story progresses, each worldview becomes more integrated, more immanent, and more centered on consciousness. Technology, consciousness, nature, and sacred identity, every philosophical layer converges into a single narrative structure. Avatar is not merely telling a story, it is guiding us through a vast philosophical journey toward unity. Now let's push this discussion one step further into the problem of morality itself, and especially into one deeply uncomfortable question. Should everyone judge right and wrong by the same standard? This is where we encounter moral pluralism. Earlier Avatar films were relatively clear in their moral structure, those connected to nature versus invading humans, good versus evil. But Avatar Fire and Ash deliberately blurs that structure. The so-called people of Ash are not portrayed as simple villains. They are brutal but not random, violent but not violent without reason. The film seems to whisper something very quietly. They did not become this way because they are evil. They became this way because history left them no other path. The violence of the people of Ashi is not a matter of personality. It is layered with historical trauma, deprivation, and loss, and a logic of survival. And this is exactly where the film touches moral pluralism. Different moral systems can form rationally under different conditions and environment. In other words, what appears as evil in one community may be the only possible survival strategy in another. At this point, two ethical positions collide. Moral universalism. There are universal moral standards that must be upheld in all situations. Violence can never be justified no matter the reason. Moral relativism. Morality changes with culture, history, and circumstance. There is no absolute right or wrong. Fire and Ash refuses to fully side with either position. Instead, it stays in the space between them, the space of moral pluralism. The film does not give the audience clear answers. Instead, it leaves us with questions like these. If violence is the only language left, is that violence still immoral? Can justice exist without reconciliation? When and how do the roles of victim and perpetrator reverse? These questions are not easy to resolve, and the film intentionally leaves that discomfort with the audience. Here one crucial distinction must be made. To understand something is not the same as forgiving it, and not the same as justifying it. Moral pluralism makes this claim. To eliminate evil, we must first understand the conditions that produced it. The film does not glorify the people of Asia. It does not praise their violence. It simply asks, if we had lived under the same conditions, would a different choice really have been possible? There are no easy villains here. Avatar Fire and Ash gives us no villains that are easy to hate. Instead, it shows different histories, different wounds, and different moral systems colliding within the same world. This film is not asking who is right. It is asking how did things come to this? And that question doesn't stay on Pandora. It follows us directly into the world we live in today. Finally, let's take a look at how this film was received by the world. Avatar Fire and Ashes wasn't just a movie that performed well at the box office. It became a global cultural event, one that audiences around the world reacted to at the same time. If we start with the critical response, the praise was overwhelming. Critics described it as the beginning of the new era in film technology, an overwhelming visual experience, the pinnacle of world building, a powerful story with universal emotional impact, and a majestic blend of music and emotional direction. Many reviewers went so far as to call Avatar a milestone of modern cinema, a film future generations will look back on to understand where cinema changed direction. In terms of technology, world building, and emotional power, it set entirely new standards. Of course, criticism also exists. The most common point raised is the familiarity of the narrative. Some compared it to Dances with Wolves or Pocahontas. Others argue that the good versus evil structure is too clear, that the villain Colonel Quality feels overly conventional, or that the film's message can come across as too direct, even moralistic. But there's also a strong counter-argument. Because of that very simplicity and clarity, audiences across the world were able to immerse themselves immediately, without language or cultural barriers. In other words, this was a deliberate choice in favor of universality. Beyond praise and criticism, this film fundamentally changed the film industry itself. It reached number 1 at the global box office at the time of release. It ignited the modern 3D cinema boom. It standardized motion capture performance, and it pushes discussions of ecology, environment, and colonialism into the center of popular culture. Saying cinema changed after Avatar is not an exaggeration. Film technology, audience experience, and even the structure of the industry itself were redefined. To sum it up, Avatar is a defining modern film that combines technological innovation, ecological messaging, philosophical depth, and universal emotional appeal. Praise and criticism coexist. But there is a little disagreement on one point. This is a film that represents each era. It isn't just a blockbuster. It's proof of how far cinema as an art form can expand. After the movie ended, a personal thought came to mind. The time I spent learning English in New Zealand, was that in its own way my own small Pandora? I left a familiar world, stepped into a completely different language and culture, and felt uncomfortable, afraid, and sometimes even lonely. But because of that time, the way I see the world changed, and that's why I'm here now, sharing this story with you. Maybe that's what Avatar is really saying too. To encounter another world is in the end to become another version of yourself.